Welcome to the first Deal Doctor live stream of 2022. We hope you had wonderful holidays, and we are eager to help you reach your goals for this year, 2022. Get a big start. As you know, we took a brief break from the Deal Doctor live streams, and during that time we made some changes. In the coming weeks, you're going to see Eric, Doug, myself, as well as members of the broker support team join us here on the live stream, as well as five-star agents, so we can present to you more information and some real-life situations that we've encountered. So, to get started, I'm going to introduce Tracy Johnson, who's going to present a real-life situation that occurred regarding agency very recently. So, with that, Tracy, welcome. If you would, please give us a thumbnail of the call you received.
Yes, and Happy New Year to everyone. Welcome back. It's good to be back. This is the day when we all start at zero and begin yet a new year. So, and Don and I had a conversation about this particular situation that came to me just a few weeks ago. But it was an agent of ours that had been introduced to a new client, and she had been out working with this client, getting to know this client, and in doing so, this client wanted to know how she should represent this client in a situation where her buyer wanted to buy his parents' home. So they were moving back to an area they had grown up in, and they were going to be purchasing, purchasing his parents' home. So one of the first questions she said to me was, can I be a dual agent? She had recently transferred to us from another brokerage and actually relocated it to a new area as well. She was originally on the west side of the state, ended up on the east side of the state, so lots of new things for her, and one of which was her wanting to know whether it was okay that she be a dual agent. So that was our first thing that we were chatting with each other about is, do we allow dual agency at Five Star Real Estate? And one of the things that I see on Five Star Connect, I don't know about you, Don, but I'll see agents say, no, we don't allow this. And I say no. That isn't actually the truth. We do allow dual agency, but we want agents to know why it is clearly that they would enter into a dual agency situation. So for this client, the answer was, yes, you could be a dual agent, but let's talk about the scenario a little bit. How did you arrive to where you're at today, and how do I help you get to where your client wants to be? So the first question is, do you have a buyer's agency contract? And the answer was yes. Okay. Actually, she didn't have an agency contract at that time, but because she was going to be representing both parties, she wanted to be a dual agent. So I said to her I'm thrilled you asked the question. I said, let me give you a scenario. I said, this is the question I ask agents when they call me, is, do you have a buyer's agency contract? If the answer is yes, there's an agency contract in place. Then we have to ask the other person, right? A lot of times we end up in a dual agency situation when we have a listing, right? I've got an agency contract with this listing, and then a buyer walks through the front door. Maybe it's my buyer that I've been working with for 6 months. So in that case, I'd have a listing contract and an agency disclosure as a listing agent, and then I would have a buyer's agency contract with a buyer. So when you have two contracts in your hand, one on the listing side and one on the buyer side, we can't really represent that buyer, so we have to lay those contracts down on the table. This, to me, is the scenario where we would give permission, I'll just say, this is the right scenario for our agents to enter into dual agency when we have a buyer's agency contract and a seller's agency contract. Those must be laid down, and now a new type of disclosure will enter in called dual agency. What says Don?
Yeah, I totally agree that there is a misconception out there that Five Star does not permit dual agency. That's not correct. We do permit dual agency, but we have to be very careful and clear about the process to get there, that the permissions, as you pointed out, are necessary, as are new disclosures regarding agency relationship as a dual agent to both parties, and the dual agency agreement signed by all parties. I think the thing we have to be very careful about and we're going to talk about this after this scenario, is we have to be very careful about prior relationships with, a client, a builder, an investor, a friend, a relative, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But so what happened with this particular situation, Tracy?
Yeah, so our agent was wanting to enter into dual agency, and it was clear that this was not a scenario how I would give advice to say this would be a perfect time for you to become a dual agent, because both of those contracts were not in hand, right? She had a relationship with the buyer, not the seller. The buyer simply just wanted to buy his parents' home, which was great, but therefore really not a dual agency situation, in my humble opinion. So therefore, in chatting with this client about what type of agency she should enter into, because initially we were thinking this may be a perfect example of a transaction coordinator, because she didn't technically have an agency agreement with the buyer at this point. She had just been introduced to them. So before she even hit the ground running and hitting the streets, the buyer came to her and said, I got an opportunity to buy my parents' house. So we thought, okay, so we don't have a buyer's agency contract, so therefore dual agency is not needed. What really is the best thing? Would a transaction coordination be the best avenue for our agent to enter into? So as we began to talk about it a little bit more, we were reminded of how our agent got introduced to this particular buyer. And in this case, it was through a reload. So then we began to think about, where do our loyalties lie? Is it with the seller? Is it with the buyer? Or are we neutral? And in this case, one could say, in the absence of the reload, we could have said it was neutral. However, our introduction to this buyer came through a relocation company. And therefore, our advice that we ended up giving was, you should be a buyer's agent. Not a dual agent, not a transaction coordinator, but rather a buyer's agent. There were no contracts in hand, and our loyalty, our fiduciary responsibilities needed to be to that buyer, because that relocation company made that introduction on our behalf to this buyer.
And I think that was the right choice, Tracy. The question is, and I think we're going to get this from agents, is can I still collect both sides of a commission? I think that's sometimes the motivation to go into dual agency is the agent wants to collect the listing side of the commission as well as the selling side. Can that still happen even though we're not representing a party who may be paying the commission? Can that still happen?
It absolutely can, and you absolutely can get paid on both sides, as long as you have disclosed it properly and included a compensation agreement that states who you are and who you represent and how that compensation is going to be paid. When you're an agent at 5-Star Real Estate, we use the 5-Star compensation form, and it strictly would say, in this scenario, using this as a scenario, it would say, hi, I'm Mary Smith, I'm the buyer's agent, I represent this person, and the commission to be paid on the selling side will be this much, and you're also going to use that as an opportunity to disclose your broker transaction fee of $295. But the key to getting paid in the absence of a listing contract is that 5-Star compensation form.
And the compensation form is found in the compensation agreement, I should say, is found in .loop. Is it in the 5-Star company forms, or is it in the buyer's form, the buyer packet, or the listing packet?
It's going to be in 5-Star company forms for sure, and it may be one of those things where Bree from our office has in multiple places, but you're always going to find that in the 5-Star company forms.
Great. I do want to touch on the thing I mentioned earlier, which is about dual agency and the care we have to take when we are considering going into dual agency. Mm-hmm. If we have prior relationships or we have some perceived allegiance, very often a judge is not going to find in our favor if we've gone into dual agency. If, for example, it's our college roommate that we're representing on one side and somebody that we barely know on the other side, or don't know at all. If we have a listing and we're holding an open house, and as you pointed out, somebody walks into the open house that we've never met, it's going to be very difficult to convince a judge that we were working in behalf of both parties equally when we have an allegiance, whether it's, a builder we've worked with or a past client, we've sold several homes, an investor, a relative. All of those things are going to influence a court's decision about whether or not we were able to act impartially toward both parties. Would you agree?
I would 100% agree, which is why it's important to ask the questions,
Yeah.
And the scenario I just described, in chatting with her, that's how we determined, well, let's see, where did the relationship begin? Who did I have a relationship with? That's important to know. And in the scenario I described, it wasn't with the buyer, but it was with the buyer because it was the relocation company.
Yeah.
So
Another aspect of this is the matter of designated agency. 5 Star is a designated agency company. So I guess my question is, can you help the viewers understand what a designated agency company means to them in their working relationships with clients?
yeah, the main thing is that we have a lot of agents at 5 Star, over 650 agents. So if you happen to be working in an area where you have multiple agents and you're a 5 Star agent and you have a listing and another 5 Star agent comes along and they would like to write an offer on your property, because we are a designated agency, I am the designated agent for the listing at 123 Main Street. And if an agent within my company comes along and wants to write an offer on my property at 123 Main Street as a buyer's agent, they can do so, because each of us are designated through agency contracts to represent our specific client.
Exactly. Great. And when must we disclose our position, agency position? You're smiling. Yes. When do we declare that and disclose it to a potential client, what our agency position is?
It is absolutely advisable that you disclose your position upon the meeting of your client, because it's in that moment where we start disclosing confidential information about the things that happen inside of an agency relationship. Motivation to move, how much money one's willing to spend, what are the parameters in which this client is willing to work. So once confidential information begins being shared, this is the time when we should be talking about what position we hold, not an hour later or 10 houses later, but it should start in the beginning.
Yeah, and to prove that we have disclosed that position, whatever it might be, it's best to get that disclosure regarding agency relationship signed by that potential client, even if we don't have a buyer's agency contract signed quite yet. We want to avoid these things being signed the day before the closing.
Yep. Yeah. Or certainly, what we see often is it's being signed along with the offer that you're writing. So at that moment, the client is emotionally connected to a piece of property. They're just signing. They're not really paying attention. And so I feel like we are not doing our client a service when we're jamming all this stuff across that loop to them without proper, patient disclosure and conversation. So
absolutely, and in doing so, as you say, jamming all of these papers in front of them, those documents can become unenforceable in the eyes of a court, because a judge is going to say, when did you provide this information to them? Well, it was in a stack of papers, 3 inches thick.
Right.
The judge is going to look askance at that. So do we have any questions, Dom, to pose for Tracy and I? Okay. The other thing that we're trying to do in the Deal Doctor live stream is to make them more compact, concise, and give you information on one topic rather than make it last for half an hour. So we hope we've done that, and I'm going to let Tracy sign off, but thank you all for joining, and Tracy, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a great day. I look forward to seeing you, and thanks for all you're doing for us, Don, and all the education you provide. This was informative.
Perfect. Thanks. We're out. See you next week.
Have a great day. Bye.